The stillness of my seaside town had always been a comfort, its tranquil pace like a soft embrace that kept me anchored in youth. Yet, that peace, so familiar and soothing, was destined to be shattered in a way I never could have anticipated. My name is Dahlia, and I once believed that life could continue in this idyllic bubble forever. But little did I know that the moment I stepped into my brother Zephyr's room that evening, everything would change. It was a single, fleeting glance that unlocked a world I never knew existed. A world that would alter my perception of family, of secrets, and of the brother I thought I knew. I never anticipated that instant to alter my life, to guide me onto an entirely distinct trajectory, one I had never envisioned. My name is Dahlia, age 24. Post my college graduation, I came back home to reside with my parents in a tiny seaside town. This locale is where everything holds a familiar essence of youth, each bough, grass blade, or the distant murmur of waves. At a stage when I ought to be striving, discovering a vocation, and constructing my own existence, I am evading it. Perhaps a portion of me fears that maturity will erase the tranquil days I am relishing. My present life is devoid of concerns. Each dawn, I awaken to the aromatic scent of baked treats from my mother's kitchen. My father frequently sits on the veranda, savoring a mug of dark coffee and engrossed in his beloved novels. As for me, I enjoy sitting by the window, gazing at the boundless azure sea, feeling the sun's rays softly caressing my skin. It was akin to an idyllic tableau where time appeared frozen. Yet, deep within, I couldn't dispel an indistinct sense of disquiet. Occasionally, I pondered if this serenity would endure indefinitely, or if it was merely the tranquility preceding a tempest. My kin, from my parents to myself, are all broad-minded, chatty, and vivacious. Family assemblies are invariably brimming with mirth and unending tales. But Zephyr, my junior sibling, 6 years my lesser, is an alien realm. Zephyr perpetually maintains a hushed, somewhat frosty, and enigmatic manner. I recall his younger days when he was a joyous child, often beaming, pure as the dawn's light. We were tightly knit. The afternoons frolicking in the yard, constructing sand fortresses, or concealed in the house's nook, sharing whispers known only to us. All are recollections I treasure. Zephyr's grin back, then was the radiance that granted me serenity. Yet, as years passed, he steadily transformed. As Zephyr matured, he grew less communicative, seemingly retreating into his own sphere. Even amidst family festivities or outings, he wore an impassive expression as if oblivious to his surroundings. Zephyr would frequently sit in a niche, his gaze lost in the distance or fixated on his device. I often witnessed my mother attempting to engage him in family dialogues, only to receive terse replies or distant silence. My father would remark that he merely requires time to discover himself, but I couldn't refrain from wondering what had shaped Zephyr thus. The chasm between Zephyr and me widened over time. Our exchanges diminished, reduced to brief phrases when we chanced upon each other in the kitchen or parlor. There were instances when I yearned to shatter the quietude, to draw Zephyr back to the luminous realm of our shared youth. But then I faltered as if standing before a threshold I had no license to traverse. I was apprehensive, not of Zephyr, but of breaching something he wished concealed, fearful that I might demolish the barrier he had striven to erect around himself. Then the indicators started to become more apparent. At every familial repast, while my father, mother, and I congregated, conversing and laughing, Zephyr's seat was frequently vacant. Initially, my mother would still summon from the staircase, her tone laden with tenderness, "Zephyr, descend for dinner," but she was met with mere silence or occasionally a curt reply, "I'm not famished." My mother would exhale deeply, and my father would simply shake his head, saying, "Let him be. When hunger strikes, he'll join us," but I couldn't disregard him. One evening, as dinner was prepared, my mother beckoned again, yet no response came. I resolved to visit Zephyr's chamber to invite him. Ascending the familiar timber steps, I heard my footfalls resonate in the hushed surroundings. Standing before Zephyr's portal, I discerned the sounds of a game emanating from within. Truthfully, this wasn't unusual, as Zephyr often engrossed himself in digital realms he could command, free from intrusion or judgment. The entrance remained shut, a customary sight, as Zephyr habitually bolted it, obliging my mother or me to rap and await his unlocking. This time, however, it was ajar. Whether by oversight or intent, the door wasn't fastened. I paused briefly, then contemplated startling him, a playful remnant of our childhood. My palm gently nudged the door, and it swung open soundlessly. Yet, the sight within rendered me speechless. Zephyr sat before his computer, but no game occupied the screen. He was fixated on a video, its content causing my heart to constrict. It was an explicit film, and Zephyr's appearance was most alarming, face flushed, gaze unyielding, scarcely clothed save for undergarments. I was at a loss, words eluding me. Frozen. I yearned to retreat, to flee instantly, yet my frame felt rooted. Shock and embarrassment for him surged, but a profound sadness and inexplicable agony prevailed. Why had my once pure, sunshine-radiant brother resorted to such isolation and release? Zephyr seemed oblivious to my presence. I lingered at the doorway, grasped tight on the handle, eyes locked on his figure. Composing myself, I suppressed the tumultuous emotions. With a quivering hand, I gradually drew the door shut, striving for silence. I desired Zephyr's ignorance of my witness. Once closed, I inhaled deeply, seeking composure. My heart raced as if ready to leap from my chest. I stood motionless for seconds, steadying myself, then tapped softly as if newly arrived. "Zephyr, descend for the repast," I uttered, striving to maintain a nonchalant tone. A prolonged pause ensued before a reply emerged. "Yes, I'll be right there." Upon the door's opening, Zephyr stood there, still appearing aloof, yet I perceived more, having witnessed his prior actions. A sense of constriction gripped me, but I concealed it, merely nodding and departing, leaving him in his clandestine realm. Seated at the dining table, my thoughts were vacant. My parents conversed routinely, yet their words seemed distant. Part of me yearned to divulge the incident, but reticence prevailed. I felt I had trespassed into forbidden territory. That evening, Zephyr joined us later than usual, his demeanor composed, gaze averted. He responded to our mother's inquiries with brevity and indifference. I understood his avoidance, my heart ablaze with concealed turmoil. The scene replayed in my mind incessantly. In subsequent days, awkwardness intensified. Each encounter with Zephyr ignited a flush, an inexplicable inner tumult. I felt exposed under his fleeting glances, not due to his knowledge of my discovery, but from the unwanted insights I gained about him. Henceforth, I observed Zephyr more intently, not from inquisitiveness, but from persistent thoughts about his struggles. No longer the carefree sibling, he was now withdrawn, engrossed in his self-created world. He seldom engaged in family dialogues, displaying detachment towards everyone. Often, I desired frank conversation, yet hesitated, fearing irreversible change. I recognized the altered dynamic between us, an expanding chasm filled with secrets and discord. Courage to bridge it wavered, but I accepted that tranquility was past. One day, my parents departed, announcing a 2-day absence. The house was unusually quiet, save for my footfalls and sporadic upstairs noises. Zephyr remained unseen, even at lunch. Part of me dismissed it as his typical seclusion, yet worry lingered, the previous image weighing heavily. That evening, dinner prepared, I ascended with a warm tray, heart pounding with anxious anticipation. Approaching Zephyr's door, familiar gaming sounds resonated, now understood as a facade, a distraction from his true state. I stood before the shut door, attempting to regulate my hurried breaths. My hand rested on the doorknob, gently turning it, pondering if he had secured it. Oddly, the door was unlocked this time. A surge of mixed sentiments swept through me. both inquisitive and apprehensive. My hand gently nudged the door open just enough to peek inside silently. But this time, everything was altered. As soon as the door opened a crack, I froze. Before me, it wasn't the sight of Zephyr seated at the computer as I had anticipated. Instead, he stood there right beside the door, as if awaiting me. The glow from the computer screen illuminated a dark corner of the room. On the screen, it wasn't the game with the fake sounds, but explicit videos playing continuously. The scene left me petrified. Zephyr was clad only in shorts, his upper body bare, his gaze calmly fixed on me. There was no panic or fear like before. Instead, he was eerily composed, as if he had been expecting this. "Sister, do you wish to enter?" His words startled me. I felt I could no longer hold the tray of food. It slipped from my grasp, clattering loudly as it hit the floor, scattering its contents. But Zephyr paid no heed. He merely stared at me, his eyes piercing through my every thought, as if trying to anticipate my response. I yearned to speak, to react, but my throat tightened, my heart pounding with an indescribable chaos. Before I could act, Zephyr stepped forward, his arm reaching out to seize my wrist, cold and firm. He pulled me into the room, shutting the door behind us. The interior overwhelmed me, a chaotic mess, starkly different from what I imagined of my once-beloved little brother. Items were scattered everywhere, clothes strewn across the bed, empty soda cans littering the floor. Images continued to play on the computer screen, making it hard to believe this was Zephyr's world. "Zephyr, turn off the computer," I managed, striving to keep my voice steady, though the tremor was unmistakable. Zephyr didn't respond immediately. Instead, a small, unfamiliar smile appeared on his face, a smile that unnerved me, as if he were deliberately provoking me, ambiguous and playful. It sent shivers down my spine. But then Zephyr rose, still smiling. He walked to the computer, slowly switching off the monitor. The room fell into an eerie silence, save for our soft breathing. I watched him, a tumult of emotions in my heart. Confusion, worry, and an unnamed sentiment. Everything in Zephyr's room made it impossible to believe this was my once cheerful, innocent little brother. Part of me felt I had lost the boy he once was, the one who once shone like the sun. Now, I was left with a Zephyr filled with mystery and perhaps much unspoken pain. Suddenly, Zephyr lunged forward, wrapping his arms tightly around me. The action startled me, rendering me incapable of reacting. He buried his face in my shoulder, his voice hoarse and restrained. "I saw you. I couldn't bear it anymore." Those words shocked me, making it hard to believe what I had just heard. My heart raced, but I tried to stay composed. I placed my hand on Zephyr's shoulder, attempting to push him away. "Zephyr, calm down," I said sternly. "You can't behave like this." But he didn't comply. He held tighter, his body trembling as if battling himself. "No, sister, I can't stop," he choked out, eyes closed as if caught in an uncontrollable emotional torrent. Panic surged within me. "Zephyr, stop, this isn't right," I said louder, my voice firm, but he still didn't release me. A feeling of suffocation and helplessness engulfed me. Zephyr was no longer himself, as if sinking into a place where reason ceased to exist. Finally, I had no choice but to shout, "Zephyr, stop right now." My cry echoed in the small room like thunder, shattering the stifling atmosphere. He paused, his body stiff, then slowly let go of me. Zephyr's countenance was now filled with bewilderment. He retreated a few paces, evading my gaze. I could discern the turmoil in his heart, blended with trepidation as he grasped what he had done. I inhaled deeply to compose myself, despite my entire frame trembling from the recent occurrence. "Zephyr, take a seat," I instructed, striving to maintain a tranquil yet resolute tone. "We must converse." Zephyr wavered momentarily, still reluctant to meet my eyes, but eventually perched on the bed's edge. I seated myself opposite him, attempting to stabilize my breathing and emotions, observing my brother before me, resembling a child who had just committed a grave error. I couldn't suppress a sense of heartache. "Zephyr, why are you in this state?" I commenced, my voice gentle yet firm. "What's transpiring with you? I need you to confide in me truthfully." Zephyr sat with his head lowered, hands clasped as if summoning the courage to speak. I waited patiently, not pressing him, though my heart still raced from the recent event. At length he spoke, his voice low and quavering as if each word weighed heavily. "I had no companions at school," he began, his eyes still averted. "No one desired my company. No one addressed me. Initially, I thought I merely didn't fit in. But as time passed, I felt increasingly isolated. They regarded me as if I were invisible. That sensation you can't comprehend, it drove me to despair." Zephyr paused, drawing a deep breath before proceeding. "One day, I was at home, lying on my bed, browsing Facebook to pass the time. I stumbled upon a link to a website. I didn't intend to click on it, but curiosity got the better of me." He halted, fingers intertwined, shoulders quivering slightly. I could sense the struggle in his words, but I remained silent, allowing him to continue. "From that point on, I began to transform," he admitted, voice strained. "At first, it was mere curiosity, but then I found myself unable to desist. It was as if something incessantly drew me further away from everything. I started to retreat, seclude myself in my room, and immerse deeper into that realm. You see, I could no longer control it. I gazed at him, heartbroken and perplexed. Zephyr, the younger brother I had believed to be so joyful and resilient, now sat before me, lost and enveloped by emotions he couldn't shake. "Zephyr," I said, my voice soft yet resolute, "this isn't right. I can't continue like this. It's only causing me to sink deeper, making me lose myself." He glanced up at me, eyes reddened, tears beginning to well. But from that evening forward, I understood I couldn't abandon Zephyr. The sight of my brother sitting there, tears streaming down his face, confessing the anguish he had concealed, made me recognize his need for a confidant, someone who genuinely cared and refrained from judgment. I resolved to be that person for him. I began to observe Zephyr more closely, noting even the minutest details. Whenever I was home, I remained attentive to his activities. If Zephyr lingered in his room too long, I would find an excuse to draw him out. Sometimes it was to inquire about his dinner preferences, other times to request his aid with tasks like tidying or mending minor items. I didn't want him to spend excessive time alone in that space, which had formerly been his secluded sanctuary. Initially, Zephyr seemed somewhat discomfited by my scrutiny. He replied to my overtures with brief responses, occasionally accompanied by weary sighs, but I persisted. I comprehended that his genuine transformation required patience and sincerity. Over time, I gradually perceived a change in him. Zephyr no longer maintained his usual aloof demeanor. He began to smile more frequently, and though initially shy, his smiles gradually became natural and warm. One day, during a family meal, Zephyr suddenly shared a humorous anecdote from school. His voice faltered at first, but upon seeing everyone's attentive and amused expressions, he gained confidence. It was the first instance in a long while that I witnessed Zephyr actively engage in a family discussion. My parents' faces beamed with delight, and they lavished praise on him. My mother smiled and said, "Zephyr, you narrate stories so engagingly. Please share more next time." My father patted his shoulder encouragingly. "That's right. Keep up your confidence, Zephyr. You're doing well." I knew those compliments significantly impacted Zephyr. He started to open up, participating more actively in conversations instead of retreating to a quiet corner. I observed that he no longer sequestered himself in his room for hours. Instead, he spent time outdoors, sometimes assisting my mother with kitchen chores or aiding my father in tending the small front garden. During such moments, I looked at Zephyr with joy. He was different, no longer the quiet, withdrawn, and lost little brother before. I also reminded myself that, although my actions might seem small, they gradually contributed to guiding Zephyr back towards the light. I couldn't alter everything for him, but I could stand by his side, reminding him he wasn't alone. Whenever I saw him grappling with studies or difficulties, I was ready to listen and support him. I strove to create an environment where he felt safe and cherished. My parents also noted Zephyr's positive shifts. My mother couldn't conceal her happiness at seeing him more content and proactive. "He's truly maturing," she told me once as we cleaned the kitchen. I merely smiled, not divulging to my mother what Zephyr had endured, but I knew his progress stemmed from his own efforts. As for me, I felt increasingly joyful each day as I witnessed Zephyr gradually regain the spark in his eyes. Though he still had moments of introspection, I understood that was natural. Most importantly, I ensured he didn't lose his way alone and wander down a dark path. I recognize that this path is still lengthy, but I trust that with the nurturing and affection of my family, Zephyr will persist in evolving, grow, and discover himself. Regardless of what happens, I am always prepared to stand by his side as both a sister and a lifelong ally. Following turbulent times, Zephyr's life ultimately regained tranquility. From a reserved, detached youth concealing profound wounds, Zephyr steadily emerged from his shell, growing more joyful and sociable. He not only rediscovered his grin, but also reestablished familial bonds long lost. Witnessing Zephyr's transformation brought me not just relief, but also invaluable insights. Those experiences taught me that sometimes our loved ones can plunge into darkness they cannot escape alone. Indicators like seclusion, isolation, or atypical conduct should not be disregarded, as they are silent pleas for aid. What they require is not critique or coercion, but a steadfast shoulder, someone eager to listen and patiently guide them back towards life's illumination. Zephyr's narrative also serves as a caution that adverse environmental factors, particularly solitude and internet usage, can bear grave repercussions. A single misstep or fleeting curiosity can ensnare an individual in a downward spiral. Crucially, they need not traverse these routes solo. With familial care and love, a beacon shines to lead them out of obscurity. To all absorbing this account, I impart a lesson learned. Be mindful of your cherished ones. Never dismiss minor shifts in their demeanor, and don't hesitate to inquire and converse. Authentic concern can sometimes transform someone's existence. Assure them of your unwavering presence, ready to heed and share. Recall that we all encounter frailty and loss, but with genuine love and camaraderie, we can resurface stronger. Never abandon anyone in their bleakest hours. Care, however modest, can engender marvels, such as love's potency. Our tale concludes here. If it resonated with you, please endorse and follow our channel for support. Thank you for your audience. Farewell, and we shall reunite in forthcoming impactful narratives.